Araboglos, who is the chair of the Community Trust of Aotearoa Climate Action Working Group, who will be presenting this session alongside Aimee Kaio and Devon Judd, who have developed the content and resources up on the website. Handing the rākau over to Linn. Tēnā koe, Linn.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you, Karania. Ko Linn Araboglos, te toku ingoa. I'm the Chief Executive of Wellington Community Fund. We're one of 12 of a network of community trusts around the country. We're philanthropic funders, so that's just a fancy name for grant makers and givers, really. My trust is one of the smaller community trusts, and we give away about $3 million in grants every year. I have also the privilege of being the chair of the Community Trust in Aotearoa Climate Action Working Group, which has led me here today with Devon and Aimee. A little bit about my background is I was born and live in Te Whanganui o Tara in Wellington, and I, for many, many years, worked in government social services, and a couple of years ago, really happily made the jump over to the philanthropic sector. One thing that's been a theme throughout my whole career is definitely a passion for advancing equity for people, and a passion for ensuring that everyone gets a fair go in life. So that's been a real theme of my work. I'm a mum to 3 teenagers. And my surname, you might think, is a little bit unusual. It's actually a Greek surname. My husband is a New Zealand-born Greek, so that's where the name Araboglos comes from. Before we get into our proper presentation, I'm just going to hand over to my 2 co-presenters to introduce themselves first, and then we'll kick off. So I'll ask Aimee Kaio first, please, to introduce herself.
Tēnā koe, Linn. Tēnā koutou katoa, he uri tēnei no Ngāi Tahu tūhaurangi ngā te whakaue me ngā puhi hoki, ko Aimee Kaio tōku ingoa. Welcome everybody to this morning. I work for the Ngāi Tahu Regional Investment Fund, and I also work with the Centre for Social Impact. My career has predominantly been in regional economic development, climate action, and intergenerational well-being and wealth is a very big passion of mine. Born and bred Southlander, and live down here in Murihuku. Yes, lovely to be here this morning. Tēnā koutou. Over to you, Devon.
Kia ora koutou. Ko Devon tōku ingoa. My name's Devon. I reign from the Manawatu, but reside in Te Whanganui Atara. Yeah, I've been in the climate action space for a few years now. Predominantly, most of my experience comes through working with Generation Zero Pōneke on all sorts of different mahi, from advocating for Māori wards to working against fossil fuel exploration in Taranaki. Yeah, and I recently have been more involved in in community food sovereignty movements in Te Whanganui Atara, and yeah, so I concern myself mainly with fostering community connection and connection to land as well. Yeah, that's about it from me. I'll pass back to Linn, and I think we'll start sharing the slides.
Kia ora, Devon and Aimee. It's great to have such awesome co-presenters. We were all commenting earlier on how it's a little bit nerve-wracking when you're in a webinar and you are not having interaction that we've all become accustomed to in a normal Zoom meeting. So if we seem a little bit nervous, or if I do, that's why. We're going to share screen now, so I'll just give Devon a moment to do that. I wanted to just spend a few minutes setting the scene, but the main show here, the main act, and the main reason we're here is so that we can share some of the information that has been pulled together in the shared resource, which we hope is going to be a really, really valuable tool for lots of different parts of the community sector, not only for funders, but also for community organisations working in the community with people. So we'll go to the first slide, I think, climate and community, please, Devon. Third slide, great. So climate change, as you all know, I'm probably going to be preaching to the converted here, but climate change is a health issue. It's an equality issue, an educational issue, economic issue, cultural issue, scientific issue, security issue, local community issue, as well as an environmental issue. And for those of you who have been in and around this space for a while, you'll probably always also acknowledge that it's quite a complicated topic, the issue of climate change in some ways. The scale and the threat that climate change presents to all of us means that the scale of solutions needed is equally huge. It means that it's an issue for all parts of society and for all of us. And that includes the philanthropic sector, which, as I said, is a fancy name for grant makers. It took me so long to be able to say the word philanthropic without tripping over it. But it's really about grant makers and givers. The funders in the community play a role in this issue of climate action. We'll just go to the next slide, please. So a little bit of context about philanthropy and climate action. We do play an important role in that we are a part of the ecosystem, and I guess the key part that philanthropic funders can play is around resourcing the change makers and the movements for collective impact. Because, as I said, the threat and the scale of climate change and the way that it will touch all aspects of our lives requires a really collaborative and collective level response. And that's where the resources that community-based funders have available to them can be turned to good use in community for climate action causes. A TICA transition, or a just transition to a low-carbon society with increased equity, climate-resilient communities and better outcomes for our environment is a critical responsibility. Yet, only around 4% of philanthropic funding in Aotearoa goes to environmental outcomes, and it just seems wrong, doesn't it? There was a survey done back in, it's a little bit out of date, 2017, 2018 time, and in that survey, they found that even if you took a broad view of what we mean by, environmental outcomes, so a broad interpretation meaning education and movement building, bush preservation, land, oceans, coasts, etc., only 4% of philanthropic funding was going to environmental outcomes. And it's really not good enough. Māori communities are leading change at the level of whānau, hapu and iwi level, and want wider systems to engage with them. There's a great quote that I've included in the slide here from Mike Smith, who's the co-chair of Potaki Ahuarangi in the National Iwi Chairs Forum. Lift your chin and look at the horizon. The decisions will be different. And I think it really sets the scene for climate action in Aotearoa to think about not just how we may or may not be impacted today, but to look forward to generations ahead of us and think about the consequences and the results of our action or inaction today and how that will affect generations going forward, our children, our grandchildren, and many, many members of our vulnerable community. I think we'll go to the next slide, please. So with that sort of challenge, if you like, of recognising that only a small proportion of philanthropic funding was actually going to environmental outcomes, and within that context that I spoke about before, that we know that climate change is a health issue, it's a social issue, it's a cultural issue, it's a scientific issue. It spreads across so many and touches so many aspects of our lives. The community trusts thought, well, let's get some research done for starters, as we always want to do first. Let's ask community about their views on climate action, their views on what we could be doing as funders to better resource and support those movements and those change makers. So in 2021, we conducted a little bit of research, and we did that with the Centre for Social Impact, who were absolutely fabulous. They surveyed and interviewed over 100 different community organisations participating in this research. And what community told us, including funders as well, so community organisations serving in the community and funders, and what community told us was that they were, first of all, definitely concerned about climate change. Secondly, that they believed action was needed to reduce emissions. Thirdly, there were huge barriers in terms of lack of resources for them to do anything about that. That included understanding emissions within their own operations, but it also meant taking any, climate action themselves with the communities that they were serving. And on the back of that, they told us they wanted funders to take a position of leadership and provide support for climate action. And that looked like funding support, but it also looked like educational resources, information, and support for them to understand their own emissions, as well as funding for climate action initiatives in the areas. So taking climate action really can contribute to greater equity, community resilience, well-being. And when the community trusts, the CEs, sort of looked at that overall driver that climate action can contribute to greater equity and communities' resilience and well-being, there was not really one among us who didn't have that as part of our strategic objectives anyway. So it sort of made sense for us to actually really lean into committing to do something specifically about climate action. Just go to the next slide, please, Devon. And so this led us to developing the funders' commitment on climate action, which officially launched in December 2021. So we're coming up to our first birthday as a commitment. And so what is it? It is a short voluntary pledge outlining 7 commitments that signatories commit to. It is modelled on overseas commitments where funders have decided to show leadership on climate action. But what is really beautiful about our commitment is it's the only one that we're aware of in the world that leads with a commitment that is for a commitment to our Indigenous people and our commitment under Te Tiriti o Waitangi. So it is uniquely Aotearoa, and it has that edge, and we hope that the resource we've put together really reflects that. We have 13 funders signed up so far, which may not seem like many, but to give you some context around that, those 13 funders have a granting capacity of over $100 million in grants per annum. So there's a lot of philanthropic resource within that group of committed funders. And actually, in the UK, they have a similar pledge, and theirs has been going, I think, for a couple of years now, and they only have 30 funders signed up. So the fact that we're not even a year in and we have this many funders who've said, actually, climate action matters and supporting our communities to be active in that space matters, we're going to commit to this pledge. It's actually a really big deal that I'm super humbled by. So what are these commitments that we're making? It's probably a really key point. So the first of all is reflecting Te Tiriti o Waitangi and supporting Māori aspirations on climate action. We really felt that it was incredibly important to have that uniquely New Zealand theme, foundation really running across this commitment, recognising mātauranga Māori and climate action and respecting whakapapa and tino rangatiratanga and kaitiakitanga is a really key priority for funders. Secondly, we wanted to ensure that we were talking about an equitable transition so that the things that we're committing to as funders are reflecting an equitable transition so that, we invest and fund in that way. The third was enabling leadership. So actively supporting community-led action, supporting and enabling the leadership of people in the community who know what they're doing to lead. Committing and sharing resources. So a big piece of the research feedback was actually community organisations are really hard pressed to just get their core business done, and that they need additional resources and funding support and information and education and all those sorts of things in order to turn priority towards climate action. So we want to commit to sharing the resources we have and building resources that are valuable and helpful. Learning and growing. We wanted to create opportunities for trustees of funding organisations, but also staff and community organisations to learn more about climate change issues, impacts and solutions, including through Mātauranga Māori. When I first got involved in climate action, which was only a couple of years ago, I actually didn't know where to begin. It felt really complicated for me and very scientific. And it took me quite a long time to actually start to gather enough information and sift through some really technical information to figure out what would be the most impactful way to fund climate action. And so we really want to try and help demystify some of that and make it easier for funders to understand what the outcomes and objectives are of funding in the climate action space. And we want to decarbonise our own investments and operations. So part of being committed to this work is that we hold investment portfolios, and we want to work towards decarbonising those and ensuring that our own operations are reducing emissions. And we want to report on the progress, which is really about us holding ourselves to account and being able to communicate clearly with community about where we're at. And our first report will come out next year in March or April. And it's probably going to show a really mixed bag, if I'm honest, about where we're all at, because we are only just starting our journey in some cases, and others among us, among the funders signed up, have really progressed a lot. So you're going to see some really, I think, interesting variants when that report comes out, and some real challenges for us ahead. Checking where I'm at here. So just before I hand over to Devon, one of the first things that the Climate Action Working Group that I've been fortunate enough to be a chair of is we decided we wanted to develop some shared resources for community. And that's where Devon and Aimee came in and have done an outstanding job of kind of curating and pulling together some resources that we think are going to be really, really valuable. So I'm going to hand over, I think, first of all, to Aimee to just introduce this. And this is the main show now. So I'll say goodbye for now and I'll be back a bit later. Aimee, I'll hand over to you now.
Kia ora, thank you, Lynn. So I thought I'd spend a couple of minutes just giving some background to the development of the Tika Transition Guide and the shared resource as a whole. We work very closely with the Climate Action Working Group that Lynn is the chair of, and also our CSI team, Karinia Lee, Rachel Trotman, Devon and myself. So at the start, Devon and I conducted quite a thorough literature and research review on climate action, climate change, climate justice. As you can imagine, we went down quite a few rabbit holes. There is a lot of online resources out there, national and international examples. So we went through a process of pulling together relevant resources, both in a New Zealand context and an international context, that we thought would be of value to be part of the shared resource. We looked at global examples of a just transition. So this framework is being utilised worldwide. So in short, a just transition means making sure that action on climate change supports an inclusive economy with a particular focus on communities. And the idea of a just transition recognises that responding to climate change will be a mix of positive opportunities, but also necessary changes. And it's vital that, you know, we transition all of our community together as a collective to a lower emissions economy. So following on from all of this research and getting our heads around the just transition concept, we were really fortunate that one of Devon's lecturers at Te Herenga Waka at Victoria University was Dr. Maria Baj.
When you look at
and she has developed the tika transition, which is a uniquely Aotearoa interpretation of a just transition. So we met with Maria and we discussed the potential use of the tika transition in the Climate Action Aotearoa web shared resource. We made some adaptations to the tika transition to make the framework relevant and easy to understand within the philanthropy and other sectors across Aotearoa. We tested this approach with climate action practitioners, climate researchers, the philanthropy and funding sector, and also with sustainability specialists. We wanted to make sure that the tika transition concept aligned with the funders' commitment, the 7 commitments, and we also wanted to ensure that it aligned with our values within our own organisations across Aotearoa. So from there, we received excellent feedback, and I will now hand over to Devon, who will take us through the tika transition and elements of the web resource. Kia ora, Devon.
Kia ora, Amy. Thanks for that introduction, and thanks, Lynn, as well. Sorry for starting that video a moment early. So firstly, we're here landing on a tika transition. Maria Baj of Te Arawa Ngāti Awa articulates this approach best, so we thought we'd integrate this video into our slides. We've got great feedback from presenting this video, so hopefully it runs well.
Tikanga Māori, it contains a whole lot of the aspects that people are talking about in terms of caring better for the environment and sustainability, thinking about how we as humans interact with the natural world and how we're connected in our relationships and so on. So I thought, actually, if you look at these aspects and think about the transition as incorporating tikanga Māori, as well as the treaty, because of course the Crown has obligations under the treaty, Māori have obligations as well, and bundle these things together alongside the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, then we do things in a kind of correct way. And I think one of the other aspects that the research around climate change suggests is that if we want to have a low carbon economy where we're really attentive to sustainability in the environment, that actually the process to getting there is pretty much as important as that kind of end goal. So it needs to be just and fair and equitable. And for us here in Aotearoa, it needs to be tika, according to tikanga Māori, and thinking about the treaty and the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples.
Yeah, so why a tika transition for Climate Action Aotearoa? This is what a just transition looks like in Aotearoa. And like what Amy was saying earlier, a just transition has become this hugely adopted in the international discourse on climate action, and it regards sort of working towards a unifying and place-based set of principles, processes and practices that will move us together from an extractive economy to a regenerative economy. And so for us, we identified a tika transition as being inherently place-based, and also must highlight that a tika transition and a just transition, they're not completely interchangeable, and that adopting the terminology of tikanga comes with a new set of responsibilities that must be honoured. So a tikanga Māori provides a broad scope of questions and considerations that ensures we're on our right path. These questions are aligned with a lot of questions that have been circulating in the space for a while, like how do we approach environmental action? How do we do this together and in our local areas and as a whole? Tikanga Māori provides a framework for asking these questions, and centering tikanga ensures that our approaches to change are dynamic and responsive to all components of our decision making, by having tikanga be inherently relational. It addresses all complexities of an environment, and hence it becomes a powerful strength. And by emphasizing rightness, a tika transition meets each person / organization, community with where they're at. It was a common concern when presenting the idea of a tika transition to funders as to whether their organizations would be ready to adopt such a framework, but understanding that tikanga is about rightness. It's about coming together, ensuring that each element of a decision is being addressed and making the right decision according to each element. It meets you with where you're at on your journey in a tika transition, which is another huge power. So a tika transition, we've identified these 4 key principles to guide a tika transition for Climate Action Aotearoa, starting with whanaungatanga, which embraces whakapapa, kinship, and relationships. So this is important in multiple ways, from ensuring that our relationships are enduring and that they're prioritized, and that we look to our relationships when we take action, but also ensures that we are placing ourselves within the environment and understanding where we sit in relation to one another and to our environment. The next principle is kaitiakitanga, the exercise of environmental guardianship. In a tika transition, this is important because we must understand who holds kaitiaki rights and responsibilities in our communities, and we must ensure that this is resourced appropriately and that barriers towards kaitiakitanga are confronted. And another core principle is utu, which rests on the idea that for everything given or taken, a return of some kind is required. So utu is fundamentally based in reciprocity. It is vital in creating a unified action by creating the grounds in which there is balance, in which we can work together in a unified approach. And finally, mana. Mana has to do with the place and leadership status of the individual in the group. We must address the authority of the individuals present in our decision making and honor this. So this is an example of how we've applied a tika transition to the funders' commitments that were mentioned by Linn earlier. So we've developed a tika transition guide which holds the funders' commitments against questions that are prompted from the core principles that we've identified in a tika transition. So this sort of idea was adapted from Maria Baj's tika transition, where she provides a toolbox of questions that relate to each principle, that guide conversation. That it's not a how-to guide by any means. It's a prompt, and this sort of the establishing of this was in response to requests from community trusts on how to initiate their journey in committing on to a tika transition. So we had to navigate this tension that existed between community groups and organizations wanting to know exactly where to start, but also not creating a tick box exercise that would deny the complexities of what a local arrangement would look like. So this is where the questions became a powerful tool. So this is one example this is funding commitment 1, reflecting Te Tiriti o Waitangi and supporting Māori aspirations regarding climate action. And so we prompt questions according to whanaungatanga, kaitiakitanga, utu and mana. And these questions, they serve as facilitators of conversation more so than a tick box sort of process. So this is another foundation of the resource that we have developed. This is Take Utu Ia, and it discusses the process where take, the issue, is identified as a breach of tikanga, or what is right. Utu is recompense, and it becomes a motion towards balance, and ia, the resolution, is found when restoration has occurred. So this mechanism was designed by Hirini Mokamede, and it is a mechanism of recompense and of refinding a balance, and typically it would involve all stakeholders coming together and identifying the issue and moving forward with each step along the way, ensuring that there is balance and that mana is honored the whole way. So we've adapted Take Utu Ia in presenting the resource that we've developed. We identified it as a powerful way of gathering our information and presenting it, with take serving as a way of exploring what we identify as the issue on a global scale regarding climate change, exploring a snapshot into the climate change stats and where we're at right now, climate change complicity, the understanding that there is a lot of mobilization of climate action rhetoric that is used against the movement itself, net zero pledges that are made by large corporations, and just creating an understanding of how to navigate and search for change that is meaningful and real. And then finally the front line of climate change, those who are experiencing the effects of climate change first and worst, and are also leading the way and how we are adapting and changing in our changing environment. So yeah, and we encourage you to explore this website. So these snapshots from the website, and yeah, there's a lot of information on there to explore. So yeah, this is the next, this is the front of the next page of the website, of the web resource, printing with again a definition of utu and how it's placed within climate action, and moving on to 4 sections under utu, from changing it in scale from international, where we cover movements such as the movement for loss and damage, and Indigenous climate justice movement, to national, where we observe Mātiki Mai as a model of utu, of finding balance within our nation, and we covering iwi/Māori strategies towards climate action, and then community action. And finally, here is the final page of the resource, and it's what we observe as the resolution for philanthropy, for funders, and it exists in this resource as a bit of a best practice and an aspiration towards how we can best fund climate action in our communities. And I think Aimee's going to explore a bit more about that. Yeah, I'll pass over to you now, Aimee, to present your part of this presentation.
Ka pai, thanks, Devon. Can we have the next slide, please? So I'm going to spend probably 5 minutes talking about what does a tika transition look like in practice. So if we think about the tikanga principles of a tika transition, whanaungatanga, relationships and collaboration as being critical to a tika transition, kaitiakitanga, for us all to be good stewards of our environment, our place and our people. Utu, the concept of reciprocity to maintain balance across our communities and environment. And mana, you know, we all have a leadership role in our communities. Therefore, implementation of a tika transition is about collectively doing what is right, what is tika, through unity and collaboration. And also acknowledging that we all have a climate action role in community. Next slide, please, Devon. So this is just a screenshot of what is on the website. So for governance, these are prompts. They are tika transition statements, but also prompts for governors to help guide and inform governance discussions around climate action. So if we look at the statements, you know, governance and leadership are representative of the communities we serve, and we have the authority to lead. Governance also fosters healthy relationships to support the self-determination of communities. And we also commit to facilitating the stewardship of resources by communities that we maintain ties to. So on the left-hand column, there are questions that we encourage organisations and governors to use these as prompts when having your climate action discussions. In particular, you know, how does te tiriti relate to our values and our work within our organisation? Do we understand our community's aspirations toward a climate resilient community and region? How is the power of philanthropic resources enabling leadership and aspiration in communities? And asking ourselves as governors, you know, are we climate competent? And if not, you know, where do we go, or who can we gain some of that knowledge and professional development? Where do we go for that? Should we go to the next slide, please, Devon? So this is just another example of how a tika transition can be implemented when we're talking about strategy. So if we look at the statement of changing mindsets is critical. So from having a sustainability strategy to a sustainable strategy for every capital, for human, financial, social, cultural, and environmental, you know, changing that mindset and systems change is really important for our climate action journey. And again, we have the questions on the side to help guide and inform our discussions and decision making. Is TDT partnership and underpinning value to all of our transition work? Do we understand where our organisation stands in its climate governance journey, and how do we need to evolve? And also, you know, how will the outcomes, the costs and benefits of this transition be distributed? And next slide, Devon. And investment. So A tika transition requires that investments are aligned with principles that are tika, so specifically kaitiakitanga, ensuring that climate action, investment strategy, policy and decision making considers the impact on all resources and people significant to our place for this generation and the ones coming. And of course, the tika transition encourages socially and culturally responsible investing. So again, the questions on the left-hand side to help inform discussion and decision-making. Do our existing investments reflect the tika transition principle of kaitiakitanga? Are our investment partners and suppliers committed to climate responsible investing and practices? Do we know our own targets and measures for climate responsible investments? And have the rights and interests of future generations been considered in our decision making? So that is just a snapshot of how a tika transition, the principles, the foundational concept, how it can be implemented for you as an individual within your organisation, and with whatever hat you may wear. There are a range of resources on the site that we do encourage you to go in and look into. We really do hope that the resource is a great guide to help inform you on your climate action journey. I think I'll just leave it there and back over to you, Lynn.
Kia ora, Aimee. Thanks for that. So there's probably information overload around about now. In a moment, we're going to have an opportunity to allow any of the participants to ask any questions. And the way to do that, it's not just using the chat function like you might normally. You actually just have to raise your hand using the little icon in the chat. And then the people that are helping us behind the scenes are going to enable you to then actually verbally ask your question, is how I understand that's going to go. So I'm just going to give you all a minute to prepare for that, while I just build a little bit on what Aimee was saying. And this resource, I'm not going to lie to you, there is so much information in this resource, lots of gold, but you are going to have to really set aside some time just in chunks to start considering those questions, working through how you might in your own organisation have those kind of strategic conversations about what climate action means to you, how you can think about the way it's folded into your strategy. It is something that we will hope will be built on and be a dynamic tool that we'll keep adding more information to. The other thing that really I would say is a call to action, I guess, is aside from checking out the resource and really having a deep dive in there, is to approach funders. And particularly those, and I'm putting my neck on the line here with my co-signatories, but I'm saying particularly those signatories who are listed on the website who have signed up to this commitment. You can be sure that because they have signed up to this commitment, that they are interested in supporting outcomes in the climate space, that they are interested in supporting. I really encourage you to hold us to account by approaching us if you have a climate action initiative or a climate action related need in your own organisation that you need some support with. I would encourage you as a call to action really to approach us and talk to us about your needs. And finally, I would love to invite you all to share, if you are willing, your wisdom and your stories and experiences about climate action with us. We do have updates that we like to share through the website about great things that are going on, not just about great things that are going on, but about learning that's happening. So sometimes the best learning we have is in the mistakes that have been made or the things that didn't quite go the way we anticipated they'd go. So we're really interested to hear your wisdom and your experiences, and perhaps there's potential for us to share some of that with your permission. And yeah, I'm now going to just maybe we'll stop sharing screen, and perhaps the three presenters will go video on perhaps, and we'll just invite anyone who's participating to raise their hand and ask any questions that you might have. I see Kim.
Oh, kia ora. Ngā mihi mahana for the presentation today. I've looked at the Tika Transition resources a couple of times, and there is a lot of information, and it's great to be able to go through it again. One question I'm grappling with at the moment is a lot of the climate action talk is around greenhouse gas emissions, reducing emissions, and the ISO framework is a Western framework, and I'm really curious how we can quantify is not the right word, but see and hear the impact local iwi and hapua are having on reducing climate emissions when the conversations aren't the same. We're hearing from our communities about clean water, increased biodiversity, healthy housing, intergenerational learning, young people moving into leadership skills, which are all impacting on reducing our carbon or building a more resilient future, but it's not translated into greenhouse gas emission numbers. Is there any guidance around that, or can you point to any resources that would support that bridging?
It's a really great question. I wonder if Aimee or Devon have any insights they wanted to share on this question.
Yeah, it's an amazing question, and one that we've been reckoning with, I think, a little bit. Just how we articulate what's going on in our environments according to our worldviews, and how we're communicating together. Yeah, I don't know, Aimee, I don't know if we found any particular like go-to resource that helps to bridge that gap. Perhaps it's part of what we're trying to do here, but creating these spaces where we can understand what our aspirations are for tangata whenua, and for all peoples of Aotearoa. Yeah, I wish I had a resource in mind, but Aimee, do you have anything to add?
The only thing I have to add, excellent question, Kim. There's a lot of research that's been happening in the background at a national and international level to understand, what's important to our communities in terms of reducing emissions, and iwi and hapu are leading the way, if you like, in terms of our natural environment and understanding our current state and visioning what their future state, what we would like that to look like. In terms of translating all of that into numbers, and then also dollars and cents of greenhouse numbers and the ETS scheme and all of that type of thing, there are a number of research entities that are looking into that, but it is, as you can imagine, it's a tricky, I think the challenge is how do we align anecdotal, traditional mātauranga Māori community knowledge with a framework of dollars and cents and technical parameters, if you like. I hope that explains. I can send you some links, Kim, but I think we are very early on our journey in New Zealand. And yeah, there is some really great research happening in the background, and hopefully there are some models and some suggestions that we can all look at and carry forward, yeah, with our respective hats.
Thanks, Aimee and Devon. That whole issue of measurement, this is slightly sort of beside your topic, your question topic, but that whole issue of measurement is something that's been acknowledged as a real challenge for funders as well, like understanding, you know, of the many different climate action initiatives that you could fund, for example, what are the ones that are going to have the most impact in a positive way and the least negative impact for a community. So one of the things that the Climate Action Working Group have been looking at is there's a whole range of different climate solutions measurements tools that are being developed at the moment, and there's some of them that already exist, but there's one that we've been looking at that actually overlays sort of the data and the sciencey stuff, for want of a better term, with sort of some well-being measures as well. So looking at a bit of a more holistic view of what an impactful measurement of a climate solution or a climate initiative could look like. So that we're in the early days of that, but I just wanted to acknowledge that this whole area of measurement is really tricky from all different perspectives. So thank you very much for your question. Were there other questions? To Alan.
Kia ora koutou. Here, Alan Clist here from Rivercare Group. Just this excuse the question, but one of the things that's been sort of troubling me a little bit is the fact that a lot of the climate action focus is around measuring carbon, etc. And I address this to those of you who are embedded in this far more than I am, so it's a bit of a naive question, but is there a focus on actually reducing energy consumption? Because a lot of the emissions are coming from energy usage, and what appears to me one of the biggest ways we could help with climate change is actually reduce our consumption, which means we're not using energy to build stuff to reduce emissions. So I'd just like to test that. You know, that is my thinking sort of off, or what's your views on that?
Your thinking is definitely not off. I'm going to open up to my co-presenters first, and then perhaps Aimee, I saw you nodding furiously.
Kia ora, Alan. Yes, I 100% agree with your thinking. You know, I talked a little bit earlier about we need to change the mindsets and systems change to enable true climate action in Aotearoa. And this is what I like about the tika transition. It kind of brings us back to, you know, our nationwide values and our obligation and responsible to te tiriti. And it takes us away from the dollars and cents and the mechanism of reducing carbon, which is a global kaupapa, back to the basics, I think, and back to our communities. And that is where, you know, we can influence and support that system change around our energy consumption, you know, as BAU. Energy security is a very good one also. Yeah, and industry going forward, our infrastructure planning, I'll leave it there because I can talk about it for a long time, but this is what I do like about the tika transition. It does, I feel it grounds New Zealand into our into tikanga principles, which align quite nicely with the values and aspirations of our communities. Devon, have you got anything to add?
No, I think you answered that very well. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Kia ora, thank you. Yeah, Alan, I'll just really briefly also say that when Wellington Community Fund, we had a climate action fund a couple of years ago, and that's sort of the beginning of my journey to understanding a bit more about this space. And we went for that very sort of what we thought would be a simple black and white situation of going for initiatives that would reduce carbon emissions. And we really quickly worked out that that was a lot more complicated than we thought. We had to take a much broader view of what climate action really meant. And that included, you know, reduced energy consumption, that included advocacy. And a lot of that advocacy that we ended up funding is centred around things like clean transportation, reducing energy consumption, education around energy consumption. We also ended up funding an initiative that is about energy security, and that it's actually a power company that is a not-for-profit set up so that people don't have their power cut off. So we looked at, we ended up taking a really broad view is what I'm getting at. So I think you're bang on that we do need to start thinking much bigger in terms of what climate action encompasses. But I think we've just about ran out of time. I think is there one more person that we were I think, sorry, Karani is coming in to sort of close us off. I think we will do that now, but if you have a question, a burning question that you really wanted to ask and didn't have an opportunity to, I think that you're able to put that in the chat now. And I will just hand over to Karani. I thank you all for participating and being a part of this. It was really wonderful to share what we're doing, and please do go to www.climateactionaotearoa.co.nz and look at the web resource. Thank you.
Kia ora koutou. That was such an amazing presentation. Thank you, Lynn, Devon and Aimee, and for the partai that we received from Alan and Kim. There was a couple of key takeouts for me. Currently, we have 13 signatories to the fund's commitment, gifting over 100 million a year. So, you know, it's small numbers, but it can be significant. And also the fact that climate change is an issue for everything, every piece of, every issue that we have, whether it's health, equality, educational, economic, cultural, local community, environmental, it's across everything we do. Thank you again for everybody who has been online this morning. And I will now close us off with our karakia whakamutanga. Nō reira, kia whakairia te tapu, ki wai te ai te ara. Ki tura ki whakatahai, ki tura ki whakatahai. Haumi e, hui e, tai ki e.